to this computer. And I will spotlight for everyone. So I am now spotlighted, and to David and Phyllis and Ellen, I'm going to try to look over here, so I'm actually looking at the camera as well as at the source sheet. So if you have a question, just say, Rabbi, I have a question, and I will hear you. Because it's going to be harder for me to see the chat and to see the video screen. So if you have a question, just let me know. Ellen, I'm going to make you a co-host. So if somebody pops into the waiting room, you can see it. Okay, thank you. So the last few weeks when we have started with the blessing for study. And so I start again with that tonight. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Adonai, our God, monarch of time and space. You have sanctified us with mitzvot and commanded us to engage la'asok. It sounds like soaking in divrei Torah, into the words of Torah. And we say that blessing, that bracha, to remind us that, in fact, we are engaged with study. This is not learning, this is study. And it is said that when two people sit and study together, talk about this stuff, the divine presence rests between them. How many of us have had some piece of machinery that did not work, and then you plugged it in? Right? We've all done that at some point. Like, why won't this stupid thing work? And then you realize that it doesn't have power, and you have to actually plug it in. One of the ways I define mitzvah is as a connection. That the act of doing a mitzvah is taking the action and connecting it to the divine, or connecting yourself to the divine, or making that connection between your experience and the divine. So I use that language to be thinking about what we do as we observe these different holy days, that we do these different rituals. And as you're realizing, what are those mitzvot? What are the ways that you use the rituals and texts and artifacts of these holidays to connect to that sense of something greater than yourself? And some of that is connecting across time, and some of that is connecting across space. So that's just a little bit of introduction for today. You will see that here is just this basic kind of reading to start. Eternal are God's source of life and blessing. We thank you for the festivals and their meaning. Yes? So do you know where to click it off? So demanding, Charlie. Sorry, we were having a screen issue here. I have now fixed the screen issue. So, eternal are God, source of life and blessing. We give thanks for the festivals and their meaning. Here are the three festivals. For freedom that gives dignity to our being. What festival is that? What is the festival of freedom? Passover. Passover is the festival of freedom. Torah, that gives direction to our life. What is the festival of Torah? Shavuot. And then and the harvest that sustains our body. What is the festival of the harvest? Sukkot. So these are the three pilgrimage festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. They also bend together in a powerful way, that they're pieces of our history. With the Exodus from Egypt, we came together as a people. We walked for 50 days. We got to Mount Sinai. God gave Torah at Mount Sinai. That's Shavuot. And then for the 40 years of wandering, God protected us as we wandered, and that's Sukkot. That's one layer of these festivals. They're also the three festivals of the agricultural cycle, that you have the three pieces of harvest. You have the fall harvest, the early summer harvest, and the midsummer harvest. So you're getting these three different harvests that are going on. So we've also talked about, you also have the rain cycle, that you have the beginning of the wet season, the beginning of the dry season that are built into this. And these were times at the equinoxes when the people of Israel would gather in Jerusalem, right? These are the pilgrimage festivals. As our ancestors made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, there to give thanks to you and praise your name, so we are now voyagers towards you, as heart and spirit rise to praise. We don't make pilgrimage to Jerusalem as much anymore, but what do? We gather in time. At the time of these festivals, the people of Israel gather to acknowledge all of the different layers, and we're going to be seeing a lot of different layers. So you see how old this stuff is. Okay, so this is from this is from the book of Leviticus, chapter 23. So this is towards the end of Leviticus. It does come from Parshat Omer. So that's the Torah portion you would read this. And this you're going to see, where are the people as they're reading Leviticus? As they're receiving Leviticus at least in our time frame, where are the people? It's Leviticus.
In the desert.
They are at Mount Sinai. Okay, so from the beginning, so from Shavuot, from the middle of Exodus, where we are right now, actually in the reading of Exodus, all the way till the beginning of Numbers, they are at Sinai. So they're sitting in Mount Sinai. You're talking about 50 days after they've left Egypt, and this is the instructions they're getting. Which is kind of incredible. This sense of time and the framework of time is set into our tradition in that time frame. So these are my fixed times, the fixed times of the Eternal One, that you shall proclaim is a sacred occasion, right? We talked about that idea last week, that you have a Yom, that it is Kodesh, it is a holy day, and the rules that you apply to Shabbat are also the rules the Sabbath are also the rules you apply to these times as well. On 6 days, work may be done, but on the 7th day, there should be a Sabbath of complete rest. So here's the acknowledgement of Shabbat, okay? And these are the set times of the Lord, the sacred occasions, celebrate each at its appointed time. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, there shall be a Passover offering to the Lord. On the 15th day of the month, the Lord's feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Now, it does say that you should do a Passover offering. What it doesn't say here in Leviticus, this is a reminder of the Exodus. Excuse me. I point that out to you because at the different places that you get the different descriptions of the holidays and holy days in Torah, you get different pieces of the puzzle. Looking back, we see the whole amalgamation of all of the different rules, but as you look at it in each place, you're going to see different pieces of it. Okay? So realize here, you don't have a reference to the Exodus, which is kind of fascinating. Okay? So here's the whole description of Passover, which we talked about last week. And then it says, when you enter into the land I'm giving you and reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall elevate it before the sheaf before the Lord for acceptance, and the priest shall elevate it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day you elevate the sheaf, it's a burnt offering, and it continues to go on. And this is a sheaf of grain. Okay, so this is part of the grain offerings that then are connected to Passover. And you can see here's the instruction for counting the Omer, and the day on which you bring the sheaf of the elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count all 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week. 50 days you shall bring an offering of new grain. We keep that idea of the time frame between the second day of Passover and the beginning of Shavuot. What you don't see is we don't still do these kinds of offerings anymore. Okay, I do teach about bread and bread making around this time, but you don't see this in Jewish tradition where you have that kind of bread ritual. Okay, and it continues with the it continues here with the different offerings that are there. Okay, so that is the one of the statements of the counting of the Omer. It has to do, and an Omer is a sheaf of grain, a bundle of grain. It has to do with in part the acknowledgement of the bounty of a grain harvest. Okay, so here you have, for many generations, farmers counted 7 weeks from the first grain harvest of barley to the second grain harvest of wheat. These days were extremely important, as any failure of these harvests due to weather, insects, or war could spell doom for the people. With the exodus from Egypt, these 7 days took on a new meaning, as they also counted our steps from slavery into the covenant with God at Mount Sinai. The ritual of the counting of the Omer solidifies this time frame, as each day we count down to the wheat harvest and up to our reunion with God at Mount Sinai during Shavuot. Okay? So it's both the getting ready for acknowledging the importance of grain, and it's also getting yourself physically and spiritually ready for the experience of the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. This is one of the 2 parts of the Jewish calendar, this counting of the Omer, where you actually see an extended period of time, kind of like Lent that you'll see in the Christian community, excuse me, where you really see it says, here are some different things you can do each day in order to get yourself ready for an event. And I know the first session I actually talked about bookending, right? That you do something before the act, you do something during, and you do something after. And this is that same kind of thing, okay? In this case, one of them is here counting the Omer. Does anyone know what the second framework of time to get yourself ready for something is? The month of Elul, getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, for the High Holy Days. We have the whole month where you start doing some of the rituals of High Holy Days, like blowing shofar and doing acts of repentance to get yourself ready for that experience of the days of awe. And that's part of Judaism too. You don't just pick up and do something, you train yourself, you prepare yourself. You use some of these different powerful rituals and customs to get yourself where you need to be. Okay? You can see here many calendars exist, offer readings, meditations, or rituals. Steve, you and I have been talking about Kabbalah. There is a whole Kabbalistic mystical practice getting ready for the counting of the Omer. There's also a Musar practice. There are lots of different rhythms that you will see and calendars that you will see people use, because different people some people need a walking schedule and some people need a Pilates schedule. Different people need different kinds of exercise to get themselves into shape, okay? One of the times I want to share with you is called Lag BaOmer, okay? Lag is Lamed Gimel. So a Lamed is worth 30 points and a Gimel is worth 3 points. What is 30 plus 3? 33. This is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. Now, this year, I passed a kidney stone on Lag BaOmer because I tend to only count past kidney stones on holidays. So far, I've had Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Halloween, and Lag BaOmer. I think that's pretty cool. Can I tell you the number of puns that you can say and complaints you can make when you're passing a kidney stone during Pesach? Let my people go. Press so hard they could not stand. It was great. Okay, sorry. Now that's recorded for all history. Especially when all the urologists in town are Jewish and at their seders and can't attend you in the hospital. It is very painful. Oy. Okay, so Lag BaOmer, 33rd day. And you might be saying, why do we celebrate? Why would you acknowledge the 33rd day? Here you can see some of the things, what you do. You're not, as you lead up to Lag BaOmer, you don't have weddings. You don't have musical experiences. There's kind of these semi-mourning periods. Some people will not cut their hair or shave. leading up to it. And why? Because Lag BaOmer commemorates a variety of historical events, including a plague. No. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Um, hold on one second. Oh, I can't do that from here. Okay. So a variety of historical events, including a plague that killed many students of Rabbi Akiva. And so it said that plague on stopped on Lag BaOmer. It's also a yahrzeit of a mystical scholar, Shimon Bar Yochai, who had all kinds of rather incredible stories about him. He was a early person in the Jewish mystical world. I believe Shimon Bar Yochai is credited with the writing of Zohar, but I am not sure. And you also have a Jewish military victory over Roman forces in 66, leading up to the destruction of the Second Temple. In remembrance of these events, some people celebrate with picnics and bonfires. Many couples in Israel get married on that, and many people choose to wait until that day to get a haircut or a beard. Just one of those little observances that happens along the way, but it also helps you kind of count and say, here, I've gotten to this place in the Omer. I've now realized that I have about 2 weeks until the 2.5 weeks until we arrive at Mount Sinai. Okay? Questions so far? So we are going to shift. So after the counting of the Omer, you get to Shavuot. Okay? And so in the Torah, Shavuot is about the grain harvest. It's about first fruits and it's about the grain harvest. It is not, let me let Mary in. You don't see a connection between Shavuot and the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai in the Torah. Okay, you can count the number of days, and that's where some of this comes from. We'll get a little bit more background on this in a couple of minutes. Okay, but here, by associating an ancient holiday of grain harvest with the Exodus from Egypt, Jewish tradition imbued Shavuot with religious significance derived from the foundational event in Jewish historical consciousness. You take an experience of the land, the grain harvest, and connect it to the experience of Jewish history, the Exodus from Egypt and the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, and you create this really pretty powerful observance. Do you see the two different layers that are there? One layer is tied to the agricultural cycle, and the other is tied to the historical story. They happen to cross over with each other, and that's how these holidays happen. Passover is the same way. Passover is the barley harvest and the end of the rainy season and the Exodus from Egypt. Shavuot is the beginning of the rainy season. Sorry, Sukkot. Sukkot is the beginning of the rainy season, and it's connected to the idea of the wandering in the wilderness. Okay? So you have history and agriculture crossing over with each other that then become these festivals. Okay? And so you have okay, Veronica is asking me, and the class is at 7. So give me 1 second here. Hold on 1 second. We have a student trying to get in. I'm going to send her the, oh. Okay, so hopefully she will come in. Okay, so Shavuot is entering to the covenant with God at Mount Sinai. It's the giving of the Ten Commandments. We'll talk a lot about some of those dynamics as we move forward. You can also see, you get language that is like a figurative marriage between God and the people of Israel. And you will see some of the ritual stuff ends up being around there. Okay. But I just want to, here's on the third month. So this is from Exodus. This is what we are reading actually this week. This is this week's Torah portion. Okay. That it's on the third new moon after the Israelites have gone from the land of Egypt. There's a little problem here, right? They didn't leave until the full moon. And 50 days after the full moon would only be the second new moon. So it's a little bit off in terms of time here. I know it eventually kind of works out, but just kind of give you, because they're going to wait for 3 days, right? But this is where you get some really interesting counting going on. You'll see that in just a moment, okay? And so Veronique, welcome. I am sorry you missed us. You must have come before I got here, but I'm glad you're with us now. Okay, so the Eternal One called to him from the mountain, saying, thus say to the house of Jacob, declare to the children of Israel, you've seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. If you obey faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. The earth is mine. So here we're getting the build up to the giving of the 10 commandments. All the assembled answered, all the Eternal One has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the words to the Eternal One. So this is the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay, so you can kind of feel all of that drama building up to it with fire and with smoke, with God answering and Moses going up the mountain. Okay, here's where the controversy. Here's where you get some fun stuff in Jewish time. Okay, in Torah, a date is prescribed for all the holidays except one, Shavuot. Torah commands us to count 49 days, 7 weeks, beginning the second day of Passover. On the 50th day, you're supposed to observe Shavuot. Shavuot comes from the word Shavuah, which means weeks. So Shavuah is a week. Shavuot is a week of weeks. 7 times 7 is 49. Okay? Shavuot is not connected to a date, but rather it's always the 50th day of the Omer. Back when the months didn't have fixed lengths, Shavuot could occur on the 5th, 6th, or 7th of Sivan. By that, it means you counted the months by the witnessing of the new moon. And so you have to witness the return of the moon to figure out when the new moon is, to figure out when the full moon is. Okay? That's why there was some wiggle room. But tells us the Israelites left Egypt on the 15th day of the first month and arrived on the Sinai desert in the third month, Sivan. It doesn't tell us which day of the month the Israelites arrived. Further, it is very surprising that the date of giving of Torah, which should be seen as the most momentous day in Jewish history, is not recorded in Torah. Not only that, but the sages in the Talmud often have traditions about the dates of other biblical events, and they disagree about the date of the giving of Torah. According to the sages, it was the 6th of Sivan. According to Rabbi Yossi, it was the 7th. Okay? What do you make of that? Charlie's like, I don't know why the difference between the 6th or the 7th would be. And you can also see, and this is important in Jewish understanding Jewish discourse. The sages, that's everybody, say the 6th. Rabbi Yossi, that's one guy, says the 7th. Even here, 2,000 years later, we acknowledge there was one guy that had a difference of opinion, but we're still going to name him and honor him. It's kind of an interesting part of Jewish life that we just keep all of the opinions around because we keep it's not this is what the law is. It was here is the law, here are the different opinions. You get to see the discourse and the disagreement because that's part of understanding Judaism too. If you're trying to decide between competing values, it's important to see all of the different competing values and the thought process. It's just a really powerful part about Judaism. It's not always about getting the answer. Sometimes it's about the discussion and the experience of it. Okay? But in truth, and this is Jewish life at its best, Torah never tells us that the celebration of Shavuot is to coincide with the giving of Torah. Okay? So as I'm sitting here trying to describe this to you and say this is when it happens, it's saying, look, it's a little wobbly out there. And here's the thing that is kind of interesting. The biblical function of the holiday has nothing to do with the revelation. It's the day of the first fruit, the offering of a new offering. Perhaps the Torah purposely tried to hide the day of revelation so that we wouldn't think that the Torah and its mitzvot applied on that day more than any other. Right? Do we know where Moses was buried? No, because they didn't want us to start going to Moses's grave and trying to treat it in that way. What it's saying is the same kind of thing. Don't sit there and say, this was the day that the Torah is all about, right? There was that experience. We want to remember standing in Sinai, but it really becomes part of every day that we do, okay? Every day, Torah is supposed to be cherished by us as if it was given that very day. Perhaps this can help us. Modern critical research casts doubts upon the authenticity of revelation, especially its traditional dating. Kind of interesting in Jewish life that here is one of the biggest moments. You have redemption from Egypt, and you have the revelation at Sinai, and yet one has a fixed date and the other gets a little wobbly. Okay? Questions?
Well,
Go ahead,
yeah.
Ella.
So it's not a function of memory. It's just not a holiday like a yard side.
It is, but it's by not quite giving it a precise date, it leaves a little bit of ambiguity around the experience, so you don't try to elevate that day. Ellen's really confused.
Well, yeah, because there are, then
Let me keep going,
okay.
because this might help a little bit too. Okay? So you have here a 19th century rabbi in Lithuania, and he's writing, he points out that in our tefillot, we don't call Shavuot Hag HaShavuot Hazeh Yom Matan Toratenu, the day of the giving of our Torah, rather Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of giving our Torah. Shavuot, the holiday of first fruits, is celebrated in the general season of the revelation. And so in addition to Shavuot's main themes, we commemorate revelation on this holiday to celebrate that season, never claiming that it was the exact day on which it happened. Does that help? I'm getting the sense it doesn't really help.
I suppose in terms of its universality, but it just seems like, oh my God, the holiest of holy days.
They don't want it, but they don't want it to be the holiest of holy days. What is the holiest of holy days? When did they go into the Holy of Holies? Yom Kippur. The Day of Atonement is Kodesh Kadoshim, Shabbat Shabbaton. It's interesting that Yom Kippur is the bigger day, the bigger moment. This is kind of a season, very much in that same way. There's a high point to the season, but it's a season of it. Okay, we'll keep going. We'll keep talking about this. Here's another kind of frame for it. Shavuot is the occasion of the giving of Torah, not the occasion of receiving Torah. Said Rabbi Menachem of Kosk in the name of Simchat Torah of Prussia, the giving of Torah took place in the month of Sivan, but the receiving of Torah takes place every day. Rabbi Menachem of Kosk said further, the giving of Torah was the same for everyone, but the receiving is different for each person according to his ability to understand. Okay? It's kind of like you get married on one day, but then the marriage keeps going. And if you've really been married long enough, no one remembers exactly how many years they've been married for. How many of us have all of those discussions? Okay. God gave the Torah, but then the receiving always continues. And in fact, the word is Kabbalah. The word for Jewish mysticism is that receiving, because you're always receiving that energy from God. Okay? So we are up. So Shavuot, you read the Ten Commandments, for example. You are acknowledging the first fruit rituals. You will also read the book of Ruth. Okay? And why the book of Ruth? It's read on the second day of Shavuot. The book is about a Moabite woman who, after her husband dies, follows her Israelite mother-in-law Naomi with the Jewish people with the famous words, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." And she asserts the rights of the poor to glean the leftovers of the barley harvest and breaks the normal rules of behavior to confront her kinsman Boaz and is redeemed by him for marriage. And she then becomes the ancestor of King David. It's quite an incredible story, and it takes place in this time frame of the harvest. Okay. And one of the ideas is that Shavuot is Ruth's coming to Israel, took place around Shavuot. And she's also accepting that connection with God through Judaism in the same way that the people of Israel did at Mount Sinai. Okay? So it's really quite an incredible frame that you have the national act of accepting Torah at Mount Sinai right alongside here's a personal act. And that's that same thing, that the Torah was given at Sinai, but we are each receiving it, each in our own way, and that we're all standing at Sinai, whether you had died, whether you were standing there, or whether you were yet to be, we were all standing in Sinai. She is one of the first conversions. There's all kinds of descriptions of and discussions of what the mixed multitude really was that came out of Egypt. You'll see all sorts of different writings of that. There's also writings that Pharaoh's daughter actually converts, which is kind of interesting. So it's Judaism. There's all kinds of stuff. Okay. If Passover gets matzah, Hanukkah gets latkes, what is the food of Shavuot? And the answer is dairy. Okay. Now, one explanation is this, that there's a connection between Torah and being said to be like milk and honey. And so therefore, you eat dairy on Shavuot to live out that value of connecting with Torah as milk and honey. There is also a running, I'll call it joke, that all of the other lobbies have their holiday, and the dairy producers of the land of Israel came and said, why don't we get a holiday? And they said, you know what, have Shavuot. Okay, it's a little wonky because there's really nothing dairy-wise necessarily going on in Shavuot, but you know, why argue when you can eat ice cream? And then you're supposed to say, but Rabbi, can we eat dairy-free? Is it this, do you fulfill the mitzvah if it's dairy-free ice cream? There isn't actually a mitzvah and a responsibility or obligation to eat dairy on Shavuot. It's a custom. But can you just imagine that conversation? Does it fulfill your obligation if it's dairy-free ice cream? Oh, don't. Perfectly good. Think of how many Jews are lactose intolerant. Okay, here's a little bit more value that goes with kind of the renewing of the covenant. You have Rabbi Dina Sussman-Berezin comments on Pirkei Avot. So shameless plug, Monday at 10 a.m. I'll have to send that reminder out tomorrow. We will be doing Pirkei Avot and podcasts. Pirkei Avot is wisdom of the sages. We will not be doing this phrase, but this is one of my favorites. im ein kemach, ein Torah, im ein Torah, ein kemach. Without bread, literally flour, there is no Torah. Without Torah, there is no bread. Okay? Without sustenance, there is no Torah. Without Torah, there is no sustenance. If you aren't fed physically, you can't get into the spiritual, moral stuff. And if you don't get the spiritual and moral stuff, all of the food really isn't going to sustain you. It's a really quite powerful phrase. And here it says, we cannot engage in the work of Torah, of avodah, of gemilut chasadim, without sustenance. And without Torah, our work would be meaningless. Our tradition teaches we have to have both. You can't attend to one without the other. Our sacred work is to feed one another, body and soul. And it doesn't matter whether, as we're talking about this, whether it's Torah in terms of the Jewish scripture or another source of wisdom and value, it's the idea that you have to feed both body and spirit, that one without the other doesn't work. And so one of the things that's powerful about this, about the idea of giving of Torah at Mount Sinai and the receiving it each in our own way, is that we're also not talking about just growing and eating. You have that whole process of transforming the grain into flour, okay? So here you see a quote from Isaiah. I will make you a threshing board, a new thresher with many spikes. You shall thresh mountains to dust, make the cliffs like chaff. You shall winnow them, and the wind shall carry them off. The whirlwind will scatter them and rejoice with God, okay? So these are the steps of taking grain and turning it into flour. You have to thresh it. That means you have to bash it to separate the grains from the chaff. Then you have to winnow it. You blow the chaff away, the plant material, so that only the seeds are there. You then have to grind it so that you then have the flour, and then you have to bake it, okay? Karen Kedar, she offers, God declared the land was flowing with milk and honey, but it was not. The land had date palms, tall, ready to yield their fruit that could become honey. And it had goats grazing peacefully on the side of a mountain, ready to give milk. We bless God who brings forth bread from the earth, but God does not. Rather, the fields are abundant with golden grain, waiting for harvest, waiting for human endeavor. The sustenance for milk, the satisfaction for bread, the sweetness of honey, all require us to see, to imagine, and to create what we can. Torah is on a two-dimensional page. It only works if you read it out loud, if you live it. Grain doesn't become bread until, and you don't just make bread, you need infrastructure, you need memory, you need collaboration between lots of different groups in order to go from a field of grain to be able to eat bread. You also need a lot of cooperation, whether you say it's from nature or God, to go from a seed to having a field of grain. There's a lot of processing and partnership that happens here. That's the same as Torah. Torah really only works with partnership and processing. If I read Torah and it doesn't impact my relationships with people, then I'm not really living Torah. It also takes time and effort. You have to read it and talk about it and think about it and study it over time that you can then metabolize it into something. Just like your wine, just like your grain, just like your oil, just like the milk, and just like the honey. By the way, the honey is date syrup. It's not bee honey. No, this is, you take dates and you put them in boiling water, and then you mush them and you pull out extract the sugar and sweetness and turn it into a honey syrup. It's called Silvan or Sylvan. It's wonderful stuff. And actually, I used some date honey that I had for the challah last week. Okay, so that is what that is date hunting. Any questions about Shavuot? Mary, Veronique, are you guys okay? David, are you following some of this? I got a nod.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Phyllis, how you doing? I'm okay. I read those lips. How you doing, Ellen?
I am fine. I am sort of still thinking about what you said about the two tracks.
Uh-oh, and then freezing. What are you thinking? You froze.
About the two tracks of the biblical sort of impact and the seasonal impact. And then also this is a wonderful metaphor, because it is so very true. It is so very true. It's sometimes like just the simplest of things that we learn from Torah. Like all of a sudden, you might take it into your own hands and use it. I hate to call it a tool, but for want of a better word, it's a practice. And then all of a sudden, like all the blessings that come are just like amazing from it. The connection that comes are just amazing. So I love this metaphor because it's true.
And the more bread you make, the more you get the sense how much of different ingredients, the different textures, the time you get a different experience with it. Okay. Yes, Veronique, we should be able to see and hear you if you speak. We can't see you until you turn on your camera. Okay. So we're gonna shift. And Veronique, don't worry, A, there's a recording of this, and B, I can always catch you up. Okay, so we are now going to go from May, June to September. Okay. And remember, September, October, pardon me. And remember that you've got the whole high holy days leading up to Sukkot. Okay. So in August, you'll have the beginning of the month of Elul, which is the 6th month. Okay. And so you have a whole month, and it leads to the 7th month, which is the month of the fall equinox. And that is the month of Tishrei. And that's where we find Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah starts on the new moon. It's one of our only festivals that falls on the new moon. Observances. I won't call it a festival. Sukkot, Shavuot, and Pesach are the festivals. It's an observance, okay? And it falls on the new moon. 10 days later, you get Yom Kippur. And then at the full moon of Tishrei, you get the building of the Sukkah, okay? And the observance of this pilgrimage festival of Sukkot. This is the Feast of Tabernacles, okay? It's also the main harvest festival, because this is when a lot of your fruits and vegetables, the pomegranates, the olives, the figs, the date, those are all being harvested, okay? Also, after you harvest them, what do you start planting? The grain. That's when all the grains start. It's also the beginning of the wet season. We'll talk about that more. So first, we're going to talk about a tabernacle is a hut. Okay, it is a temporary structure, a frail hut, somewhere between a tent and a pavilion. Okay, and it symbolizes the frail huts in which the Israelites lived during their 40 years of wandering in the desert. It doesn't say that necessarily in Torah, but that's just part of our tradition. It reminds Jews of the biblical account of how God protected them, provided their needs in the wilderness, and still watches over us today. There's actually the text for a good night's sleep is Ufros Aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha. God spread over us your sukkah of peace. Okay? And there are two important rules Well, first of all, it's supposed to be outside. I'll talk about that. No comment, Charlie. So the sukkah is supposed to be outside. Okay, I'll talk about why in just a minute. It's got to have at least 3 walls. Only one of them can be existing wall. So if you have your house, you could put one of them, but you can't put it inside your house. Watching Charlie over there. It can be any metal, generally canvas, wood, or metal, any material, sorry. Okay. And the roof is supposed to be temporary, covered with loose branches or anything that grows of the ground and has been cut from the ground. You can't use a tree as your skach, as your covering. And according to the tradition, the roof covering should give shade. It has to cover a certain amount of shade, but you also have to be able to see the stars through the roof. Okay? It's supposed to be truly temporary. It's supposed to be pervious to the weather. You're supposed to be able to get weather through it. That's kind of the point. Okay? And I'm teasing Charlie because the last number of years we have built our main sukkah at Temple Beth Shalom inside. Okay? Some of it's air conditioning, but I will tell you what's the bigger issue. Okay? When you go to have a picnic or a camping trip, what is the last thing you want it to do? You don't want it to rain. It has not rained in the land of Israel for 6 months. It's dry, it's dusty, you're ready for some rain. So what do? They build an outside structure that is open to the elements, and they sleep in it and eat in it for an entire week. They're daring God to make it rain. It's kind of incredible. We not only have fire ants, but what does it tend to do in Florida in September and October? Rain a lot. And if it's so hot and humid and it's so wet because it's been pouring down rain that you can't actually get into the sukkah, it kind of defeats the point. So we have in fact built our sukkah indoors, but we try to spend some time outdoors. It just happens to be really rainy here. And if building my sukkah inside helps it be more rainy here, I think it's okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
why can't you use an existing tree?
Because
it's not.
Yes. Because this is about the harvest. This is about the people of Israel being on the move from in the wilderness. Part of it is a sacrifice. If you just use an existing tree, you're not giving up the tree. By cutting things, by cutting some of the greenery around and using it for the roof, you're cutting back some of you're sacrificing, you're giving up something of value. Okay? Is that helpful, Alan? You are supposed to cut the palm fronds. You don't have to destroy it doesn't say destroy the tree. Aha! So Charlie is saying it's not a sacrifice because I have to trim the tree anyway. Yes, that's part of it. This would be a season of trimming your trees anyway. But you're just not allowed to use an existing tree. Like you can't go under an oak for your skach. Okay? You usually decorate it with hanging fruit, and you put up posters. We'll read a little bit more. Okay? So beginning Yom Kippur, Sukkah is named after the booths or the hut, which Jews are supposed to dwell. It's a reminder of the 40 years of wandering. It's one of the 3 great pilgrimage festivals. Much of the imagery and ritual of the holidays revolves around rejoicing and thanking God for a completed harvest. It represents the huts. Here's another layer, right? So one was the wandering for 40 years. A second one, this is the one I grew up with, is that the farmers would set up huts in their fields to be closer to their produce to help during the harvest season. And it's a reminder of that harvest. What was that, Charlie? So they slept in their fields near their harvest. Okay. As is the case with other festivals whose origins might not have been Jewish, the Bible reinterpreted the festival to imbue it with specific Jewish meaning. And I am sure there were harvest festivals around this time, no question about that. And some of this stuff is coming from all sorts of cultures around, but you can also don't have to work that hard to be able to see where this is connected into the story and the rhythms of Jewish life. I don't know that it's saying that you're reinterpreting to imbue it with Jewish knowledge. I think it is seeing that Jewish knowledge and timing that is part of that time of year. That makes sense. Okay, you are hard pressed to not say that Judaism isn't getting stuff from the cultures around. I don't see Judaism taking and completely overlying and rewriting the other holidays of other places. There are authentic, powerful Jewish meanings that are rooted in this stuff. Okay? Did that make sense? Yes. Okay. You would have your festival at the full moon. Why would you have your festival at the full moon? It doesn't have to, yes, you could, but why would you have the big party around your harvest at the full moon? More what stuff? No. If you're getting a big group of people together for a big party that's going to go after nightfall in a world without a lot of with no electric lights, without a lot of illumination, by having a full moon, you can party longer because you can actually see better. It's a really dark world out there. Right. But you do your festivals at the full moon because you've got that great illumination and it's easier to party longer. I say party with lots of quotations. I mean, celebrate in a reverent way. Okay. The Zohar, the central text of Jewish mysticism, suggests that it's not that these structures are built on strong foundations, however grand and however beautiful, that called the divine. This is part of the beauty of this holiday. It is the frail, unstable building, the sukkah, that generates such energy that the divine presence manifested in small booths along with the souls of Judaism's righteous ancestors, okay? So part of this idea is to remind you of frailty, to remind you of mortality. We don't say a fortress of shalom each night. You say a sukkah of shalom. It might be porous. You have to help with the construction of a sukkah. And so it's just that idea that it's not all Judaism is built on bedrock and fortresses. Sometimes some of the power comes from that instability and that uncertainty. Okay? It's okay to deal with frailty. So in here, you actually see here's another practice that you see. It's called ushpizin. And you're actually supposed to invite our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joseph, and David. You're told that you set up a party and you celebrate. There's a whole ritual of this, of welcoming them to your sukkah. And you've also see here's another list of female guests that has evolved over time. Zohar is a book of Jewish mysticism. It is one, Veronica is asking, Zohar is a book of Jewish mysticism. It's the core book of Jewish mysticism. And Jewish mysticism is one of those different kinds of cultures and practices. It's a whole set of spirituality, a way of reading text, or a way of studying text that is one of the disciplines within Judaism. Some people really like these mystical traditions, and some parts of Judaism really don't like these mystical traditions. I was describing it to Steve last night that there is Mexican cuisine and then there's Thai cuisine. Both of them will sustain you. They have different palates and different cooking styles and different ingredients. And you get the same thing in Judaism, where you will get different cultures and different approaches for being able to experience Jewish life. Sometimes it's like Thai and Vietnamese that are very similar to each other, and sometimes it'll be like Indian food and American food that are very different from each other. Okay? Did that answer that, Veronica, I hope? But you will see some stuff from Jewish mysticism. Okay? Just watching the time. So here's Rabbi Akiva. The ritual dwelling in the sukkah evokes sensibility through its symbolism of clouds of glory and the experience of the sukkah's shade. Tangibly protective shade bestowed by clouds. This is yet another one. So I'm going to keep going here. Okay. Etrog and lulav. So part of Sukkot, you're supposed to spend time. You're supposed to eat meals. You're supposed to invite people over. You're supposed to sleep in your sukkah. Another ritual of Sukkot is the etrog and lulav. And I do not, unfortunately, in this have a picture of it. I will try to do that before we end to bring it. But basically, you are talking about a palm, a stalk of a palm frond, willow branches, myrtle branches, and an etrog, which is a citron, which looks like a lemon. Okay? And you can see this here in Leviticus. This is the same section that we were reading. We were talking about the counting of the Omer at the beginning of class. On the first take, you should take the product of the goodly tree, that's the etrog, the palm bough, the boughs of the leafy tree, that's the myrtle, and the willow of the brook, and rejoice before your eternal God for 7 days. Okay? That's the instruction. And so this is led to the etrog and lulav, which you take and you shake through the 7 days. Okay? Have any of you ever heard of a rain stick? I have one in my office. Like they have the beans in them. This is the Jewish version of a rain stick. We want to make it rain. So you're calling out to all of the directions. You're making the noises that sound like rain, right? And you're going to see right here, so you have these 4 species. Wait until you see all of the different descriptions about what they mean, okay? So you wave the lulav each morning of Sukkot, either before the morning service or during the service just before Hallel. Hold the entire lulav in your right hand with the spine facing you. The two willows are on the left, the 3 myrtles are on the right, and the etrog is in your left hand. They should touch each other. You say the blessing with the pitam, which is the blossom end of an etrog, down. You turn the pitam over, and you do it, and you're facing towards Jerusalem. Now, it says facing east towards Jerusalem. If you're in Beersheba, you'd face north. Just saying. Or Ren is in India, so Ren would face west. I'll have to ask Ren if the Bima in India, in Indian synagogues, faces west.
Michael,
Yes.
the references to the willows, would they be the trees like the willow tree, or would they be reeds like pussy willows?
No, they would be the willows like the tree.
Tree, okay.
You'll see a little bit more in just a second. Okay? So you shake the lulav in a motion, reaching out and in, straighten your arms opposite your chest and folding them against your chest. You're shaking it. Okay? You do it 3 times in front of you, to the east, to the right, south, back over you. So in all of the different directions. Okay? So that's one way of shaking the etrog and lulav. Here's another interpretation. Close your eyes as you wave. Focus on the rustling sound of the lulav and the smell of the etrog. Let them become your branches and your fruit. So you are the 4-in-1 tree whose fruits and branches are waving. You are the tree of life. What is the tree of life? Torah is the tree of life. Okay? It's also, the tree of life is also at the center of the Garden of Eden. You're connecting back to the Garden of Eden. I'll throw this in there. Beautiful episode of Radiolab called Tree to Shining Tree. And it talks about the fungal tubes, the microscopic fungal tubes that connect tree root to tree root. Trees are bound and connected to each other with that network. It makes a wood wide web. I love saying that. If you say, I am the tree of life, it reminds us of how we are connected to a greater ecosystem around us. Here you see it. A human being living a decent, holy life becomes a Torah, a tree of life. A person is an organic part of the natural world, a microcosm of the universe. Talk about being grounded or rooted in tradition. It's a beautiful image, okay? Here's another one. As you wave, be conscious you're pulling all 6 directions of the universe towards you. For a moment, you are the very center of all worlds. They depend on your internal clarity and unity. Here's another one. 4 species represent 4 letters of the name. The etrog looks like the yud. Okay. The soft and curving myrtle looks like a hay. The palm is a vav, and the willow is another hay. What does yud hey vav hey spell? It's God's name. Okay. Bringing together with the right and left hands unifies the name. Spelled on the right only for someone facing you. So you're holding the name only if someone's looking at you. Those who are not yet conscious of the unity, Sukkot is a moment when God's name will become one with all who live on earth. Okay? Here's another one. By the way, I have a page that there are probably about 8 or 9 of these. Each different interpretations, different kavanot, things that you can think about or pray about or use to bring the etrog and lulav forward. All of them are across Jewish tradition. To me, that's a great Jewish artifact and a great Jewish ritual, because the more different ways you can approach it is just how powerful it is. It tells lots of stories at once. The 4 species, and I think, Steve, you mentioned this one, or somebody did recently, 4 different kinds of Jews. The etrog, with both taste and smell, those are both people who study Torah and do good deeds. The palm tastes fruity but has no smell. So date palms don't have an odor but are very flavorful. Those are people who study but do not act. The myrtle with a smell but no taste, those are good deeds but not study. And the willow, which has neither taste nor smell, are those who do neither. All 4 are necessary to a community, even those who neither act nor study. That's part of the challenge of an etrog and lulav, to remember to draw everybody in the community, even the wicked son. Right? So Rabbi Richard Ellenson was the rabbi who ordained me. He was the head of HUC when I was ordained. He recently passed away. May his memory truly be for a blessing. In his class to us, he had just been appointed as I was finishing up. And what he did is it was a beautiful piece of Talmud that he laid out for us, and he showed us. It was this kind of idea, and it said, if you only act as a rabbi towards the congregants that are fully engaged and fully energized and fully committed, you will have a very small community. You have to meet people where they are and realize everybody from the very committed to the least committed still needs your attention, your spirit, and strength. You don't just work with the perfect people, you work with everybody because everybody makes up that community. Okay? It's just yet another piece of another way, a facet. So what are the 4 different kinds of Jews? It's right here. You should be seeing it, Veronique. And it's not 4 different kinds of Jews. It's 4 different dynamics that you see with these qualities of study and action. Okay? It's not, this isn't the 4 kinds of Jews like Orthodox, Reform, That isn't, this is a different kind of telling of that. Okay. Okay, so that's the Etrog and Lulav. As I said, I have a lot more. Happy to share that as we get into Sukkot in a number of months. Can we get to Purim first? Okay, so, but you also have the reading of the book of Ecclesiastes. So Shavuot has Ruth, Purim has Esther, Song of Songs is during Passover. You have Tisha B'Av is Lamentations, and here you have Ecclesiastes. Why Ecclesiastes? It allows us to connect Israel with Sukkot in a visceral way. The emotional uncertainty remains reinforced now by the uncontrollable physical power of nature. Think about this. You've just gone through the high holy days where you're asking God for forgiveness for your sins. What is supposed to start with Sukkot? Rain. If it doesn't rain, then you don't have food and you have a famine and you die. That is kind of the frame of this judgment. This is, you're really seeing the fragility of life. If you don't have food, if you don't have the natural environment, you don't survive. Okay? Same thing with the wilderness. If God didn't provide manna, we would not have survived. It's that, again, it goes back to the partnership. And if you sit there and wait for God to bring it, you won't get anywhere. So you see that back and forth. Some of it's our responsibility and God's responsibility. How do you both take responsibility and appreciate your fragility? That's some of what's happening here with Ecclesiastes. A lover of money will never have his fill of money. A lover of wealth is full of income. That too is futile. The worker's sleep is sweet, whether he has much or little to eat, but a rich man's abundance doesn't let him sleep. It's just some of the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes, with its theological challenges, thus seems a perfect fit for Sukkot, a mitzvah of physical challenges. Do we sleep sweetly in a sukkah, or is it too hard to be away from the soft comfort of our own bed? Are we thankful in a sukkah, or are we put off by a little chill or a brief shower? Doesn't say monsoon. Do we teach our children in the natural space of a sukkah, or do we long for the regimentation of a classroom? For 7 days or 8, you eat refugee bread for Passover. For the 7 or 8 days of Sukkot, you get out of your physical structures and you live in closer with nature, appreciating that fragility and that now I'm blanking on a word, but you're putting yourself out in nature. You have to deal with the elements. You have to deal with the bugs, and you have to deal with the rain, and you have to deal with the fact that you don't have control all the time. Okay? Okay, so you have these. So these are some of the things you do on Sukkot. There's also a lot of water rituals. I lost the water ritual. Ah. Okay. Darn it. I lost the water ritual. Okay. Now I'm whining. I'm actually crying over my water ritual. So there are a lot of water rituals that happen with like pouring out of water. There's a beautiful one where you were supposed to actually empty out your cisterns at this time of year. What's the danger of emptying your cisterns? That's your water supply. But why might it be good to empty your cisterns? Because the water might get stale. And so you're saying, God, I'm emptying out my cisterns, make it rain. It's again one of those things where it's this kind of, it's part of one of those natural cycles, because you don't want the water to get stale. It's also putting your life at risk in some ways. And it's also, in a sense, a challenging nature to cooperate with you. Pretty incredible. Okay. The last day of Sukkot is called, or the festival after Sukkot is called Shmini Atzeret. Okay. It's kind of a mystery. You see that word of Atzeret in Torah. It has its own name, and people are wondering, is it kind of part of Sukkot? Actually, Shemini, which means 8, Atzeret was special. It teaches that on Shemini Atzeret, God expressed how hard it was to separate us from the end of a full month of holidays. And for that reason, Shemini Atzeret is a bonus holiday. We're about to go into Mar Cheshvan. You're about to go in this time where, okay, we are about to go in this time where you're not going to have any festivals, right? You had a month to really get yourself ready for the holidays. Here's the bookend of have one last big bash celebration before you end, okay? Simpson Raphael Hirsch, a 19th century German rabbi, wrote that Atzeret means storing up, because we store up the gratitude and connection to God that we acquire through the entire fall holiday season, about to enter the Jewish month of barren holidays, apt Mar Cheshvan, not celebrate our holiday Hanukkah for nearly 2 months. Simchat Torah is one of the most fun days of the Jewish year, completion of the annual cycle this is now the Simchat Torah. So Shmini Atzeret, you get different kinds of rituals. You get like the beating of willows and all sorts of stuff that's just this big finish to the Sukkot celebration. Then the next day is called Simchat Torah, okay? And Simchat Torah is Shavuot is the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. In the fall, what do? We relive the reconnection of our Torah cycle. So you finish Deuteronomy and you start Genesis. It doesn't mean that the end of Deuteronomy happened there and that the beginning of Genesis happened there. It means that you're physically getting to the end of the scroll and you want to start it back over. It's totally reading cycle. It's not historical cycle, but this is when that happened. And I just wanted you to kind of see this. Okay. This is the last verse of the Torah. Uchol hayad ha'hazakah, uchol hamorah hagadol asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael. Do you all see the lamed? Do you see that lamed? Okay. So this is about the end of Moses' life. Never again arise of Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face. From the various signs and portents the Lord displayed to him in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh, all of his courtiers, his country, for all of the great and awesome power that God displayed before all of Israel. You see the El Lamed. Okay? The first letter of Torah is Bereshit, the bet. The Aleph is the verse number, which wouldn't appear in a scroll. That's a bet. Lamed bet spells Lev. The end of Deuteronomy and the beginning of Genesis, even though they're at opposite ends of the scroll, what's connected in? Your heart. So the scroll is one long strip. It's up to us with our heart to connect the end back to the beginning. It's a really kind of beautiful, powerful way of seeing that reboot and that constant spiraling and cycle. Okay. So Veronica is pointing out the Nechemta. Yeah, so it ends with Moses, but then it's Moses passing on to Joshua. And then as soon as you end Torah, you then already reboot it, restart it, go all the way back to the beginning. And so this is very much a part of that. So you have lots of circuits of dancing with the Torah. You have lots of honey around. You have lots of tasty treats around. Everybody is allowed to be called for those aliyot of Simchat Torah. It's just a giant celebration of how do we keep that cycle going, okay? So now we've gone from Passover, the Exodus, okay? So we've had the Exodus, giving of Torah at Sinai, and you get now Sukkot, and leading up to and finishing with Simchat Torah. Those are the 3 pilgrimage festivals. You have some in the spring and summer, some then in the fall that are the tent pegs that Jewish time is really built around. It is interesting to me that Purim and Hanukkah, which are much later in Jewish history, have taken on so much more significance because they're the ones that are easier to relate to our kids. Shavuot happens during the summer. People are out of school. They aren't around, so you don't teach them as much in religious school. Sukkot comes after we've done all of this work with the high holy days. People are shuled out. That's a technical term. People have been coming to the synagogue a lot. They're tired of coming to the synagogue. Can't we be done? It is a real challenge as a rabbi in the Reform Jewish world, because so many people lose these festivals, which are the embodiment of so much of our story and sense of time and sense of space and sense of the food we eat and where that food comes from. And so that's part of why I wanted to teach this cycle of Jewish time, space, celebration, and observance, and all of these different layers, because there is so much intricacy and beautiful ritual that goes into these holidays and into these festivals. Are there questions that I can answer? Go ahead, Charlie.
Nowadays, we can get any kind of fruit or vegetable all year long. So it's hard to symbolize a certain holiday.
Okay, so Charlie just said that we live in a time where fruit and vegetables are not seasonal anymore. And so you lose some of that power of the cycle. And I will tell you, if you're in Israel, it is so seasonal and you really do feel it. But you are absolutely right. If you can always have an apple, you don't notice apple season as much. Israel is very much still a very place seasonally for their fruits and most of their fruits and vegetables. And so that was my first time in a long time when I was there. Oh, wow, we were there a long time ago. Jill and I were there 27 years ago in 1996 and 97. Oh, that's a long time. But that was really my first experience as an adult being in that kind of seasonal place where the fruits and vegetables only come around when they're harvested.
They like to have stuff they move in Israel.
Well, they also have surrounding countries that don't export and import with them very well. But Israel is very farm to table because it's small. There's a lot of agriculture there. And that's just kind of part of the nature of the economics and politics. Other questions?
Michael?
Yes.
When you were talking about the sukkah, you mentioned a few times there the months of September and October. And I'm kind of a little bit confused because if their calendar was based on the lunar calendar, which is really not aligned with the solar calendar.
Aha! The Islamic calendar is lunar. Judaism uses a lunar solar hybrid calendar so that we use a lunar calendar that we intercalate to add an extra month to 7 out of every 19 years so that the fall holidays fall in the fall and the spring holidays spring in the spring. So it's the and you if you watch some of the earlier sessions that we did, David, I actually talked about it quite a bit because that's just part of Judaism. That's why our holidays range around in about a 6-week window because of the reality that we use that we use a hybrid calendar. It's also a hybrid Egyptian Babylonian calendar because the Babylonian calendar is very fall based and the Egyptian calendar is very spring based, and we use both.
Okay, thank you.
It's one of the fun, powerful things about Judaism. Usually, why have one answer when you can answer two things at the same time? From a certain point of view. Okay. And it's also part of, yes, this is the last session of